Hello and welcome to episode 650. 650 episodes. Wow. Episode number 650 of the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear. This is Monster Kid Radio. I am your writer, host, and producer, Derek M. Cook, and the music you're hearing right now is a song called Song from a Balcony. It's from the band The Seismics. It's from their album Lost Summer that came out, in January. Go check out the album over at theseismics.bandcamp.com or look them up on Facebook and let them know that Monster Kid Radio sent you when you're done listening to this episode of the podcast. We have this one and then one more episode of the podcast with Steve Turek stepping up as the guest host. We were supposed to be away a lot longer, and Steve sent us so many submissions and so many guest host recorded conversations that he's had with various people in the Monster Kid Radio universe, family, community with a K, I don't know. Monster Kid Radio irregulars that have been on the show in the past, and this time around he sits down with author Julian David Stone. Julian David Stone is the author of The Strange Birth, Short Life, and Sudden Death of Justice Girl, and more appropriately for Monster Kid Radio, the novel It's Alive. We had him on the show when It's Alive came out. I think that was sometime last year, and it's a great read. It still has the Monster Kid Radio seal of approval. It is set in Hollywood, 1931, about the production of the movie Frankenstein. You got characters like Lugosi and Karloff and all of them in there as, well, point of view characters. It's really cool to get inside their head and spend some time with these icons through the lens of Julian David Stone's writing. It's a great book. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes where you can pick up a copy of your own. But first, why don't you listen to him and Steve talk about the movie The Invisible Man, 1933 classic directed by James Whale. I believe we've talked about it on the show in the past before, but it's a good movie. It's been a while, that whole 10-year thing I mentioned earlier. So let's hear somebody else talk about it again. And that's what Steve and Julian are going to do here on the show this week. Big thanks to Steve and Julian for making this happen. Of course, we've got the regular segments here on the show as well, like Kenny's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland and Mark Matzke's Beta Capsule review, where he's still in the thick of things with the Return of Ultraman. Also this week, we have a voicemail.
Hey, Derek, this is Bill Lehman. You've read some of my emails before, but I really wanted to comment on the recent placement episode with Steve Turek and Kevin Flick doing the trilogy of the Dracula movies. I want to hear more of that. I really enjoy their perspective and the way they framed the discussion of those three movies. Perhaps if I could suggest a topic, it might be the Creature from the Black Lagoon trilogy. Again, I think it's been a while since you've had that, and we all know how much a favorite that is of yours. I also have to give them big props for covering The Terror of Mechagodzilla. That is my absolute favorite Godzilla movie, and it, even though it's from the 70s, and it doesn't really fit all your parameters as a classic Universal movie, it is my favorite, probably because that's the one I saw when I was a little kid on a Saturday movie matinee on my UHF channel in Northwest Ohio, and it just made a huge impact on me, seeing a giant mechanical Godzilla. I'd seen Godzilla movies before. I couldn't tell you which ones because they all jumbled together, but Terror of Mechagodzilla is the one that really stood out to me and made me fall in love with kaiju movies. So I'm glad you're back from Kuwait. All the best to you and Beth, and please, if you can, have Steve Turek and Kevin Flick do some more movies with you, or if you can't cover them, then we really want to hear more of them. Thank you, and have a good February. Bye.
That is awesome. And, I loved listening to the conversations between Steve and Kevin with the Dracula family reunion movies, the Dracula, Son of Dracula, and Dracula's Daughter, although I guess it was in Dracula's Daughter and then Son of Dracula. Anyway, it was a lot of fun to hear that conversation, and I just got to sit back and hang out and listen. I didn't have to participate in that conversation. I say have to, like it's a chore. It's not. I love talking about these movies with people, especially people who love them as much as Kevin Sklick clearly does. I do want to have Kevin on the show more in the future. You know, I've got a long list of people that have been on the show in the past, and every single one of them I want to have on again and more often. It's just a matter of scheduling and lining things up. As far as Creature from the Black Lagoon, that trilogy of films is always going to be special for me. Everybody who spends more than 5 minutes with me knows that Creature from the Black Lagoon is my favorite film of all time. I love that movie so freaking much. So of course I want to talk about it more on Monster Kid Radio. I just know that when I do, I tend to get kind of one-track minded about the whole thing, and I don't talk about the other movies or any other movie as much as I probably should. That said, Beth and I just watched Lisa Frankenstein last night, and not once but twice we saw Creature from the Black Lagoon artwork as part of the set, the production design. The main character loves like old films and that sort of thing, and there was like a hand-drawn gill man on the wall, as well as a reproduction of one of the Creature from the Black Lagoon movie posters on the wall as well. Movie was kind of cute. Movie was pretty fun. Definitely outside of what we normally talk about here on Monster Kid Radio, or at least it has been in the past, and that's something else I want to comment on, especially since he brought it up regarding Terror of Mechagodzilla. First of all, Godzilla is always going to have a place here on Monster Kid Radio, whether it is a classic Showa-era film, a Heisei-era film, the Millennium movies, the Legendary, or the Monsterverse stuff, all of it. It's always going to have a home here on Monster Kid Radio. Kaiju films are part of the MKR DNA. I don't care when they came out. Sure, I may be more partial to the older movies that are more suit motion or suitmation, rubber suits than CGI, but still, I love them all. They're always going to have a home here. I know that for a long time here on Monster Kid Radio, I always said that Night of the Living Dead was kind of the unofficial cutoff movie for coverage here on MKR, with a few exceptions. Part of it was because I felt like 1968 with Night of the Living Dead, that movie caused a paradigm shift in independent horror and just horror in general because of what it did. It was an incredibly powerful film, it had a lot to say, and it really kind of just blew up. Also, because of my past as a podcaster with Mail Order Zombie, I wanted to use that classic as a benchmark for what I was going to cover up to with this new podcast. But I've now produced at least 3 times as many episodes of Monster Kid Radio as I did with Mail Order Zombie, and I'm kind of over that. We've been dipping into the 70s. We've dipped into the 80s and 90s even here on the show, and I suspect we probably will more as we move forward, because eventually we are going to run out of those movies that were produced in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. But we're never going to lose that through line. We're never going to lose that love of the classics. But if we can find a vibe or a love of the classics in a more modern movie, I think we're probably going to talk about it here on MKR. Never are we going to shy away from a movie like Lisa Frankenstein, I suppose, if it's going to mention or at least reference some of the classic monster movies. You know, the movie Frankenweenie, I keep thinking I want to talk about here on the show because I know it's got a lot of love on its sleeve for the classic monster movies and that sort of thing. Heck, at one point I wanted to talk about the Doctor Strange TV movie from the 70s because at one point they're watching Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein in that film. So, you know, we could see some expansion of what we talk about here on the show. It's not a hard and fast limit. 1968, I'm not going to really stand by that much more anymore. Plus, it's my show. I do what I want to do. I'll watch the movies I want to watch. And hopefully you'll be along for the ride. And if not, I'll have to bring Steve Turek and Kevin Slick back to bring you back. As far as Terror of Mechagodzilla, that's a classic, man. That one is so good. And part of the reason why I wanted to have that conversation play when it did is because Godzilla Minus One was in the theaters at the time. I wanted to kind of get a little bit of that kaiju SEO action. I don't know if it helped to get any more listeners to Monster Kid Radio by talking about the new Godzilla movie the same week we were talking about Terror of Mechagodzilla, but, you know, it's worth a shot. And it's a great film, and Steve and Alistair Hughes did a great job talking about it. I'd love to talk about it more myself down the line. And like I said, I'd love to talk more about Creature from the Black Lagoon, because I just can't shut up about that movie. Thank you for calling in, though. I appreciate it. And, if you want to have your voicemail played on the show as well and leave us some feedback, constructive criticism, or talk about anything that's going on in your part of Monster Kiddom, you can call me at 360-524-2484, or you can email me at monsterkidradio@gmail.com, or you can get real fancy and create an audio recording of your very own and just email it to me at that same email address. The contact information is available on our website at monsterkidradio.net, and I'll go over it again at the end of the show. For now, let's go ahead and let the Seismics take a break. I've been making them play here for a little while. You'll hear their song in its entirety at the end of the show, so stay tuned for that, for Song from a Balcony. Let's get to Kenny's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland and Mark Matzke's Beta Capsule review. And, I have something to talk about regarding the Monster Kid Radio Patreon coming up right after this.
Godzilla, champion and defender of Earth in The Terror of Godzilla.
Titanosaurus, Mechagodzilla, destroy them.
He holds the front line of battle, while in their spaceships, aliens command a deadly duel. Will the powerful serpent Titanosaurus' cyclone tail and the robot monster Mechagodzilla's lethal rays destroy our Earth? See this ultimate test of power, The Terror of Godzilla, rated G.
Zombies! Hallelujah! Hallelujah!
From award-winning author Stephen D. Sullivan, White Zombie, a new novel based on the classic motion picture.
What do you see? Neil asked. Madeline peered into the wine glass, pretending to be a fortune teller, and for a moment her head reeled. She did see something within the depths of the cup. Terrible dark eyes staring up at her, boring into her mind. The eyes of that awful man they'd encountered in the road. You see? She felt dizzy now, really dizzy, and her throat was tight, as if cold hands were closing around her neck. What is it? Neil asked, concerned. The eyes burned into her. She couldn't breathe. I see, she managed to gasp. Death.
Available now in print and all ebook formats. Find it on Amazon, Smashwords, Drive-Thru Fiction, and other quality outlets. Also available in a special edition, including the complete movie script. Grab White Zombie before it grabs you. Details at sdsullivan.com.
There is no other way.
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Monster Attack Team prevails upon Captain Ibuki to take a vacation, his first in 3 years, so he takes his wife and daughter to her ancestral home near Lake Hasune. A local legend tells of a god that crosses the lake when it freezes, so the Ibuki family bundles up to witness the event, although the captain decides to turn in early, having had plenty of sake with dinner. This leaves the captain in a vulnerable position, which shape-shifting alien Grotus tries to take advantage of, to no avail, since Ibuki remains in radio contact with MAT headquarters. The invader switches strategies, releasing the fearsome kaiju-sized shrine god Kodaigan from the icy lake, creating the perfect diversion by which to abduct the captain's wife and daughter. The alien then issues a chilling ultimatum: disband Monster Attack Team and destroy its facilities, or the Ibuki women will be terminated. The Demon God Howls at the Moon is a strong, standalone episode deftly balancing action, suspense, and character development. The character at the center of this story is Captain Ryu Ibuki, and with high efficiency we learn that the captain is both bound by duty to the mission of MAT, and is genuinely concerned for his family, and harbors some guilt for not being there for them. This conflict is explored in other series as well, such as 2015's Ultraman X, and succeeds in humanizing the characters. It's fun to see Ibuki singing along with the radio and letting his guard down at dinner, although he pays for it almost immediately. In a similar way, we see different sides of his daughter, Minako, who expresses tween boredom on the way to the village, but who later declares that she wants to become a member of Monster Attack Team, like Oka and her father. Kodaigan, the Shrine God, is one of the more impressive opponents faced by Ultraman in the second half of the series. Its appearance and sound design are appropriately haunting, in what seems to be an admiring and deliberate tip of the cap to 1966's Daimajin trilogy. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
Fear of the unknown, the unseen grips the populace. As a human being made invisible and insane by a potent drug, preys on the citizenry, intent on vengeance. Prison walls cannot hold him. Scotland Yard cannot stop him. And while science works frantically, while a loved one waits and hopes, the invisible hands of a condemned murderer deal out death and destruction.
Inspector, I don't understand. Jeffrey, he's invisible. Why can't I see him?
Oh, he's here, is he?
Catch him, Inspector. He wants to kill me.
There's an enemy spy at large, an invisible man.
It's amazing. Oh, you will be of great help to us.
Who is this terrifying Phantom Commando? What is his amazing mission? See The Invisible Agent, suggested by H.G. Wells' Invisible Man, starring Ilona Massey and John Hall, with Peter Lorre, Sir Cedric Hardwicke, J. Edward Bromberg, Albert Basserman, in the most amazing story of our times.
Hello there, Monster Kid Radio heads. This is Kenny with a look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. Today's film, the 1933 classic Universal picture, The Invisible Man, was highlighted in Famous Monsters 47 from November of 1967. A celebration of this masterpiece was included in the obituary of its star, Claude Rains, who had passed earlier in the year. Let's take a look at some highlights from that article. Life left Claude Rains on the 30th of May. Prince Sirki, the Grim Reaper, appeared before him in his 77th year and bid him follow him from his hospital bed to death's domain. Bela Lugosi, Dracula, Lon Chaney Sr., the Phantom of the Opera, Claude Rains, the Invisible Man. Each of film monsterdom's greats has been greatest in one single role, which his name is synonymous ever afterward. Claude Rains will always be remembered as the Invisible Man.
All right, you fools. You brought it on yourselves. Everything would have come right if you'd only left me alone. You've driven me near madness with your peering through the keyholes and gaping through the curtains. And now you'll suffer for it. You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you.
Griffin, the Invisible Man, pulls off his artificial nose.
There's a souvenir for you.
Removes his glasses.
One for you.
Unwraps the bandages around his head.
I'll show you who I am and what I am.
One man cries.
Look, he's all eaten away.
A bottle on the table raises up, apparently by itself.
It's easy, really, if you're clever. A few chemicals mixed together, that's all. And flesh and blood and bone just fade away. A little of this injected under the skin of the arm every day for a month. An invisible man can rule the world. Nobody will see him come, nobody will see him go. He can hear every secret. He can rob, rape, and kill.
Claude Rains never got an Oscar, though he came close several times. I would have given him one for this sequence of hair-raising drama in The Invisible Man, when his sweetheart Flora, Gloria Stewart, tried to reason with his disintegrating brain.
Jack, I want you to let my father help you. You know how clever he is. He'll work with you day and night until you find that second secret, the one that'll bring you back to us.
Your father? Clever? You think he can help me? He's got the brain of a tapeworm, a maggot, beside mine. Don't you see what it means? Power. Power to rule, to make the world grovel at my feet.
Grovel. The way Rain said it, distorting the soundtrack with the power of his pronunciation. The pure, wonderful, incredible feeling with which he invested the word. The way it sounded, like gravel dragged over ground glass by a vulture's claw. Grovel. He made an unforgettable motion picture moment out of the force, fervor, favor, fanaticism with which he delivered the single word. A triumph for Rains. And at the end of the picture, just before he finally became visible in death, he was given one of the classic lines to utter, a cliché to be heard in every other monster, horror, and science fiction movie of the 30s.
I meddle in things that man must leave alone.
James Whale of Frankenstein fame insisted on Rains for the part and directed it. The real Rains. The late star was married 6 times, once more than Bela Lugosi. One marriage, to a concert pianist and professor of music, Aggie Jambor, lasted only 6 months. He was very devoted to his last wife, Rosemary Clark Schroed, writer and painter, who preceded him in death. Rains was only 5'6" tall, but like Napoleon, another small man, towered because of his powerful personality. Born on November 10, 1889, he made his stage debut 6 years later in Sweet Nell of Old Drury in a London theater. He became a callboy at His Majesty's Theatre, later stage prompter. Finally was promoted to the important post of assistant stage manager, a position he maintained for 7 years. At the age of 16, he played his first really important part on the stage in The Gods of the Mountains. The title was to prove prophetic, for on the Olympian heights of horror greats, Rains was to become a name to conjure with, along with Chaney, Karloff, Lugosi, Laurie, and Lee. Back from hell. Like millions of other men, Claude Rains fought in World War I. When war broke out in 1914, he was in America and hastily returned to England, where he enlisted as a private. He spent over 3 years on the Western Front in France. Once, when a shell exploded and hurled a herd of sandbags through the air, they landed on Captain Rains and almost buried him alive in a trench, but he survived and returned to the Broadway stage where he scored further successes. The night of the day we had all heard the word that Claude Rains had died, I was with Ray Bradbury, Robert Bloch, and Fritz Lang. We were all depressed by Rains' death. I asked Lang if he had directed him, but he had not. But I know he was a great talent, he said. Amen to that, said Robert Bloch. One of the greatest. He brought the undeniable stamp of authority in every role he played. He can never be replaced. On June 1st, Ray Bradbury wrote this open letter for readers of FM. To say that Claude Rains influenced a whole generation of fantasy fans, or just plain lovers of fine acting, would be stating the obvious. I think I saw some of his films as many as 7 or 8 times. His portrayal of the Invisible Man when I was 13 years old remains a splendid memory and in fact a film that can hold its own today. I was touched and moved by the fact that on the night of his death, Claude Rains was appearing as a ventriloquist in my And So Died Ryaboshenska on television for the Alfred Hitchcock Presents show. It is a good thing to know that Mr. Rains will be around one way or another for the rest of our lives. A few days later, Alex Gordon, the producer, told me of the time he met Rains while Rains was making The Lost World. A marvelous actor, and I had hoped to bring him out of his semi-retirement for a role in my next picture. So, had he lived, we might have seen Claude Rains in Monster in My Blood. Claude Rains himself leaves us with a profound thought which he found comforting after the loss of his last wife. He quoted this in his own handwriting to 2 young FM fans who share it with us, one of the last observations by our departed hero. I wept because I had no shoes, until I saw a man who had no feet. He is telling us things could be worse. He might have been killed in the First World War. He might never have made any pictures at all. Au revoir, but not goodbye, Claude Rains. In our mind's eyes, you will always be visible. That is all for this week's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. We will have more next time. For MKR, this is Kenny saying adios.
Now, don't give me that invisible stuff again.
Honest. And there were footsteps with no feet. And a grip that was unpacking itself.
All right, boys, let's go.
They're private eyes, they are. And they're tickled to death, as you may be, that their first job is a murder case. Only a man they can't see is driving them to distraction.
I said pull over to the...
A blonde is trying to booby-trap them. And the syndicate is trying to set them up for a quick 1-2.
Buddy, you know I'm no fighter. Oh, what's the difference? Look, watch this.
Get the Pentagon. Class A emergency. The Joint Chiefs of Staffs are expecting the call. The rocket has just been entered by a robot.
It lives. Life? Consciousness? A machine?
It intends to put itself section by section into orbit around the Earth. And that day, forever forward, Earth will be its slave.
A boy made invisible by mysterious scientific force. Held in the sinister power of the Berserk electronic brain machine developed by the boy's father, famous scientist Dr. Tom Marino.
You have 58 hours. If at the end of that time you have failed to supply the required information, the boy will be destroyed.
Top scientists and brass from the armed forces confer on the emergency. One by one, they are trapped and microscopic transistors implanted in their brains.
Each one of examination by Dr. Bannerman.
May one ask why?
Because at least two of us here, and maybe more, have one of these surgically embedded in their skulls. Which means they're completely under non-human control.
Dr. Marino, you have been informed of the situation. My robot is already in space, and your son is completely in his hands. Marino, I direct your attention toward the television screen. You and your wife will remain here, and you will be obliged to look and listen. Are you ready, robot?
Ready, Master.
Good. You may begin with his eyes.
I'd like to take a second to read to you something that I posted just the other day to the Monster Kid Radio Patreon. I know I mention Patreon at the end of every episode, and a lot of you know that I do have a Patreon, and, well, there are some changes coming. In fact, that's what I called this post. Change is coming. As I've been working to rebuild, redirect, and refocus everything Monster Kid / Team Death / writing related since Beth and I have been back from Kuwait, it's time to re-Patreon. Thank you to everyone who currently is or has in the past supported my efforts with Monster Kid Radio. Your support has meant the world to me. Sometimes the podcast has only been able to continue because of the Patreon patronage, so thank you. I'm going to interrupt my reading of this post here by explaining that a little bit more. It's not free to podcast. I mean, it is pretty cheap, and there are free ways to do it, but Monster Kid Radio is hosted over at Liberated Syndication, which is one of the main podcast aggregates, hosts, servers, providers. I don't know what it is you call them, but Liberated Syndication is where I've hosted almost all of my podcasts in the past, whether it's Mail Order Zombie or Monster Kid Radio or even the Plan 9x9 podcast we did several years ago. They've all been hosted there. And they charge. They don't do it for free. There are fees involved, and the more space you hold on their servers, on their sites, the more expensive it gets per month. And I get hit with a bill from them automatically at the beginning of every month. It goes through my PayPal, which happens to be what is attached to my Patreon. And there have been some months when the Patreon money goes straight from Patreon to PayPal right out to Liberated Syndication. Because of the patronage that I get from some of you, sometimes this is the only thing that keeps the podcast afloat. So thank you. Let me get back to the reading here. Monster Kid Radio is not ending anytime soon. We have 2 more episodes, guest hosted by podcaster extraordinaire Steve Turek. Check out his Diecast movie podcast, available through all major podcast directories. This is one of those 2 episodes, and then the next one will be next time around. I'm still fine-tuning plans and details, and while I'm not calling it a relaunch, the show will evolve. Nothing is leaving. Segments from contributors, as long as they keep coming in. Listener feedback, when we have it. In-depth movie discussion with fans. Surf music. All these elements help to make MKR what it is. I may shuffle things up a little bit, but you can expect all of this with every episode of the podcast. While I have not made any official announcements, I think it's obvious at this point that Monster Kid Radio has become a Team Death production, and as such, I'll start folding some Team Death content into the podcast as well. And you've already heard promos for some of my writing projects. You can expect more updates about my writing in the future. This all said, the monster of Monster Kid Radio, the monster of? That's funny, I'm just going to leave that there. This all said, the focus of Monster Kid Radio will still always be the classic and not so classic monster movies of yesteryear. Sure, I'd like to include more convention coverage or recordings from special events or screenings, but the base of MKR will always be discussions with passionate fans about the movies we all love. I'd like to interrupt here as well and talk a little bit more about the convention coverage, special events, things like that. It's becoming more and more difficult for me to go to various conventions. If they're in town and I can get booked as a panelist, which usually means the convention covers my convention ticket, awesome. I will go there and I will represent Monster Kid Radio and get coverage and content for the podcast. But to go out of town, Crypticon is something I've been wanting to go back to for a while. Monster Bash I haven't been to since it's come back after the pandemic. I'd love to go to these things, but there are costs involved. Even if they pay for my ticket, there's travel involved, and that costs money, especially going to something like Monster Bash when I'm out here in the Pacific Northwest, and it's out in Pennsylvania on the other side of the country. It can be cost prohibitive for me to do that. I still want to do it, but in order to make that happen, we have to do things like Patreon, and brother's got to find a job. So we're still working on that as well. As far as special events and screenings, if there are things happening in my neck of the woods, again, I will try to cover those kinds of things, but it can be tough. All right, back to this. The Patreon reward levels will be streamlined. I'm still working out those details, and that will be in place by the end of March. So this will all be figured out by the end of March. I'm excited about this next stage of Monster Kid Radio. There will be changes, but never at the expense of what we all love about the show. Think of the first 651 episodes as the Showa era of MKR. The next Heisei era is going to be an exciting chance to see the show grow and evolve, and it can only happen because of the listeners and the patrons. So stay tuned to Monster Kids. Wanted to share this with you because I know not everybody is connected to my various social medias, either mine own personally or Monster Kid Radio's. So I just wanted to get a chance to put this out there on the air, so to speak, so that people know what's going on. I am going to probably start pushing the Patreon a little bit more. I don't want it to become an overly aggressive, give me money, give me money, give me money kind of thing, but I am going to mention it a little bit more. And once we streamline the rewards, and I'm going to be honest with you, it's really hard for me to do reward fulfillment, so we may end up seeing things like I announce you as a Patreon patron on the show, which I've done in the past, and I'll probably bring that back. But I feel like, having spoken with a number of you over the years, the main reason you support Monster Kid Radio through Patreon is because you just love the show. Rewards or not, you like the podcast, or maybe even you like me enough to throw a couple of bucks my way, and I appreciate that. So, we're going to kind of dial back a little bit on physical rewards or tangible rewards and focus more on just making the show better and expanding it into something that we love even more, and I love even more than I do now. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you a little bit more. Thanks for downloading the show. Thanks for everything that you do for me at Monster Kid Radio, because rest assured, as much as I hear from you how much you appreciate the show or you thank me for the show or whatever, you're giving me so much more than I could ever possibly give you by giving me an opportunity to engage in this hobby that I love so much. I wouldn't be doing this for over 10 years if not for the love of the medium, the genre, and the community.
Welcome to a night of total terror. Night of the living dead. The dead who live on living flesh. The dead whose haunted souls hunt the living. The living whose bodies are the only food for these ungodly creatures. Of the living dead. More shattering than your strangest nightmare.
It takes just 10 seconds for the flesh eaters to strip the last bit of flesh from any living thing.
Listen to those screams. They're eating him alive.
These things want flesh, any kind of flesh. And once they sense it, they'll eat their way through anything that comes between them and their meat.
They stood alone, surrounded by the most abominable threat ever faced by human beings.
Don't touch those things! I need bandages, strips of cloth, anything, quickly!
One by one, half mad with terror, they turned upon each other.
You'll die first, Butcher! You'll die first!
You killed her!
Animal!
You will lie down in one of the contaminated areas and be our guinea pig.
What was the dread secret of this horror that was born out of science and madness? Was there no way to escape? The flesh eaters.
This is Count Vlad, but you may recognize me by my more familiar name, Count Dracula, and I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. In your parlance, you might call these revelations spoilers. You know how the children of the night, monster kids, can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned, and don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
Hello everybody, this is Steve Turek, and welcome to Monster Kid Radio. I know Derek and Beth are still in Kuwait, so everybody's hopefully enjoying themselves at home. I don't know when this episode will be going out, but I've put out a few episodes for Derek's show already. But today we're doing The Invisible Man, and I'm being joined by a person who's been on Monster Kid Radio before, Julian David Stone, the author of It's Alive. And if you're a Monster Kid fan and you don't have It's Alive, what's wrong with you? I mean, really, how you doing today, Julian?
I'm good. Great to be on with you.
It's great having you on. You've been on Derek's show. You've been on my show. You've been on The Bloody Pit with Rod Burnett. You've been on a lot of different shows, and every time it's not always exactly the same, but it's always great. You know, like what you're saying. I mean, even if it's about the book, there's different variations of it. And that episode you did with Derek, I told Derek when it came out, I said that was his best interview for a long time. I felt that he had done.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice to hear. I love talking about the monster films. I love talking about movies, but I particularly love talking about these great, classic horror films. I just love it.
Out of the Universal horror films from the 30s, The Invisible Man is one of my favorites, and I know we're going to get to that in just a minute. But so when I asked you like what movie you want to pick, and you put down The Invisible Man, I'm like, yes, because I did it once on my show when we did the James Whale retrospective with Joshua Kennedy. But to revisit it again with somebody else, it was exciting because it's been a couple years, and I'm like, oh, this will be interesting to see what a different approach is. And I know Derek has covered some of these movies already on this show that we've been doing, because Derek told me, just do any movie you want, don't worry about doubling up. So sometimes it's nice to have a different approach.
Oh, great. It's, yeah. Like I said, I love talking about movies, and I certainly love talking about this one.
I just want to let listeners know, so I don't forget, you are going to be at Monster Bash this July. You're going to be down there with your books and doing a presentation and everything else. So this would be your first bash. Are you excited?
I am incredibly excited. Ever since I wrote It's Alive, I've been a monster fan my whole life, but I haven't been in the world of it, and I wasn't aware of it, frankly, until the book came out. And one of the things that got mentioned over and over and over again was Monster Bash, and I'm so excited that I'm finally going to be able to attend it. And I'm really excited because about 7 or 8 months ago, for the first time, I did this presentation that I have about Junior Lemley, Carl Lemley Jr., the main character of my book, that tells the story of his life and the origins of the beginnings of the Universal Monster Cycle. And ever since I first did it, I've done it about 10 more times at various conventions and historical societies, and I'm going to be doing it at Monster Bash, and I'm so excited about doing it there because, like I said, I've just heard so much about this event, and I'm really excited to be a part of it and to get this opportunity to do the presentation. I think people will like it. I'm sure the material has been covered from various directions before, but I know for a fact I have some stuff I'm going to show that hasn't been seen before because I was able to dig out some stuff that I was very fortunate to get that I'll be able to show at this convention that I think people will enjoy, that are some stuff about the early days of the monster films that I'm looking forward to showing there, and just the presentation in general and the event in general.
And listeners, if you haven't gotten his book, It's Alive, it's available on Amazon. You can get the soft cover, you can get it on Kindle. So it's readily available in multiple formats. Or even if you pick it up ahead of time, unless it's the Kindle version, bring it to Monster Bash and he can sign it. The Kindle one might be a little difficult to sign.
Yeah, I'll sign their iPad for them.
Hopefully you don't sign the screen with a permanent marker.
Yeah, exactly.
But you picked The Invisible Man. Obviously, you have a love for Universal monster movies, like you said, but just particular, why The Invisible Man? Because you did have a lot of Universal movies to pick from.
Yeah, that's for sure. Because I really love it, and it's a film that it's the one of, I sort of break down the first 5 of the Universal cycle of the sound ones as sort of the ones, one, because they're the ones that are really made during Junior Lemley's era, and they're the ones that really set the tone of the monster cycle, and, being Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, and Bride. And of those, Invisible Man is always the one that I show to somebody, believe it or not, as the introduction to the monster films. I feel that I love all of them, but that one in particular is the most accessible to people who are not necessarily interested in the whole world, because it's the most complete in terms of what we're used to in a movie. I think, we can argue endlessly. Like, I don't even pick it as what I think is the best of them, but I think it's the one, it's certainly up there. It's the one that most, as much as I love Dracula and Frankenstein, they both suffer, and I hate to use the word suffer, but they're both a little bit of the other era of filmmaking that we're coming out of, particularly Dracula. Dracula still has a lot of, there's Dwight Frye's makeup that is a little bit of a silent movie, and Frankenstein is a step away from that, but there's still the technology of film and the use of sound was still being figured out. And in general, in Hollywood, it's about 1932, 1933, that if you look at a movie from that era, you'll go, okay, it looks old, but I understand the relationship of sound to the moving image is what we've become accustomed to in the use of music and all that. So The Invisible Man, being from October of 1933, feels the most like a recognizable movie to what an audience sees today. Again, obviously it's 90 years old. It will look out of date, but the relationship of sound to picture and all of that is very much what we've become accustomed to. So that's one of the reasons that people who are not interested in old films and horror films will thoroughly enjoy The Invisible Man, and it's a great film. It's just a fantastic piece of work. It's the storytelling, everything about it is just top rated.
What I still love about it, and like I said, it's to me my favorite one of the original, the 30s Universal movies, is the cinematography with the special effects still work well today as they did, as you said, as we're recording this, it's just a little over 90 years ago when it came out, because it came out, October 31st, 1993. And we're recording this a few days before Christmas in 2023. And I love the effects. I love the script, the acting by Claude Rains and his voice. The sound and the way it's being filmed are so great, and it's done at a crisp, brisk 70 minutes.
Yeah. It's a fantastic film. It's just nonstop action. The effects are just fantastic, and the character is so strong. He's so, and he gets, one of the fun things, obviously before I watched it again to prepare for this interview, and I had actually, it's because again, I show it a lot to people. I've seen it quite a bit. It was great watching it again, and I just was particularly taken this time by Claude Rains' performance and how much he really drives the movie forward and how he gets more maniacal as it goes on. When you first meet him, he's brusque and he's a little angry, but then he just gets absolutely maniacal, and it just really drives the story forward just really well. And it's just really a great film.
And I'm going to ask you an interesting question with this. I know there's some people I've had talks with before that don't really consider The Invisible Man a monster. They look at it more as a science fiction movie more than a classic monster movie like you would with Dracula, Frankenstein, where you're dealing with things that you would never encounter. Here it's I guess for lack of a better word, a typical person who nobody can see, but he's done scientifically. And, but to me, whether it's a science fiction movie or a horror movie with a monster or a combination of all three, it still works so well in those areas. And I think because I like science fiction movies a little bit better than I like the typical gothic horror type things. And I think that's why for me it works better, because it's there's a science reason for it. It's because he developed this formula, and this formula is what drove him to madness and so on. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it works very well for me in repeat viewings and enjoying it. Now, there is one aspect of this movie, which I'm sure we'll get to, which doesn't always hold up for me in repeat viewings.
Oh, what is that?
One performer, it's just, which, come on, I think you know by now when I say performer, and then if I add her to it, you'll know who I'm talking about, and all the listeners do too. But Una O'Connor, I love her in Adventures of Robin Hood. It's a little much for me in this one, especially when she first goes up and it was something small she sees and she just is like, oh, and it's just, it doesn't take much to get her going way over the top. I know from talking to people, it's James Whale's humor, and some people just love it. I'm not one of them. But otherwise it's, everything is great. To me, there's people say Spinal Tap, they dialed to 11. I look at it, she dialed it to 102 or something. She just went, off to the moon. But I mean, I'm curious of your opinion of that. You might be one that loves it.
Well, it's funny. It's one of those that I can see both sides of it. I completely agree. It's over the top and kind of ridiculous, but I do love it. And clearly Whale loved it. He did it in Invisible Man, and then again she does it in Bride of Frankenstein. It's part of the charm of the movie and what he brings to it, because he really clearly had an affinity for these sort of British characters that he did, and it's we're kind of going into a different direction, but I'll go there. And one of the things that I noticed this time watching it, and I started to think of it in the other James Whale stuff, is the stuff about class that he imbued his movies with. And it's a very interesting thing, if you know his story, which you clearly do if you did a retrospective, that he presented himself as posh and upper class, but he was anything but. From his upbringing, he was extremely lower class. So it's really interesting that he populated these films with these lower class characters that were clearly characters from his upbringing that he clearly loved, because it's one of the things that really makes, the Universal films in general so fun to watch are all of these characters, and in particular in these early ones that he did that really sets the tone going forward. It's not hard to extrapolate without Invisible Man, without Bride of Frankenstein, with these characters like Una O'Connor. You don't have, the two robbers at the beginning of Frankenstein, meets the Wolfman and all that stuff. These are all characters that are from this world that James Whale, created for these films. So yes, I do like Una O'Connor's performance, but I won't argue that it's not over the top. It's funny showing these films to my son, because he just cracks up when she starts going crazy, and so it really kind of grabs you. It's an interesting thing that he kind of only seems to do it with her. There's other characters, but she's the one that sort of goes the most over the top. Yeah, it almost makes me think that she's doing somebody from his life. I have no reason to believe this, or no proof, I should say, but it's such a specific over the topness that he repeats again, that it just makes you wonder if there's just something in there with, Una O'Connor that touched something in Whale, because it's so specific and he repeats it, So
I have no evidence in the theater, but being that he had a theater background and before he came over to the United States, pantos. Do you think it was something like with this, like maybe he did some pantos back over there, and that was something that carried over with the a little bit, having that over the top type humor on occasion?
I guess it came from somewhere. That's clear. It's something that he really that he really liked, and I know, but I enjoyed it. And I think it even there's other stuff. Obviously, when you think of her, particularly in The Invisible Man, the first thing you think about is the reactions. But I also really enjoy her sort of very elaborate, when she first is taking The Invisible Man up to his room and opening all those different, things, like you think she's at the, at the Ritz. And it's just, it's really fun to see her. And it's, part of what makes the film so interesting is, again, is her character and so much texture to the whole experience that Whale brings.
Now, I know some listeners might not know on Monster Kid Radio, but you also have directed films, written screenplays, and also have a keen eye as a photographer, because you have a great book out on different photos from rock and roll concerts. So you have a keen eye for setting up shots and doing that, because a lot of people might not realize, because we talked about It's Alive. And I just want to get your opinion on some of the shots that were done in the movie. To me, the particular one I loved a lot is the opening shot with the Invisible Man arriving at the lion's head, and how they cut it back and forward between what's going on prior to him getting there, then after he shows up, and then after he's taken to his room. And I agree with you. I love Una O'Connor in this part where she is taking him to the room, and she flips the one thing so she can get through the one bar, and then has to flip the other bar in the door. I love that elaborateness of the whole routine and how James Whale set that up to be that elaborate. But what's your opinion with your background?
Sure. This is something that I also thought watching it this time specifically, knowing that we were going to talk about it. And there's a little bit of also kind of a literary allusion sort of crossing into film. But there's this, particularly in the beginning, there's this sort of, he shoots everything with layers. Everything is always shot through lots of crowded people in the bar. And it's almost like the unwrapping of the layers, particularly in this, the Invisible Man comes in, everything is shot through the people watching it, but we're seeing it, from behind them. And then, like you said, he does, or Una or Condon's character does all the elaborate opening of all the different stuff to get out. Then she opens that door to that back area. And it's like, oh, here's another layer. You move into another world. And then there's that great thing of the women sitting around drinking. And it's awesome because it's just a complete throwaway. You just get this sort of little, dash of class and social structure that all the men are in the other room drinking and the women are all in this room. And then you go up the stairs into another room. So it's all these different layers till you get into this private world before he unwraps himself and can be, his true self, the Invisible Man. But it's that type of touch that really hit me this time in the way he photographs it, and we never see that. We see the room again where the women were drinking, but you never see those women again. It's just a really fascinating touch that, again, it's part of sort of the examination of class that Wales seem to be doing a lot, particularly in this film.
I think not only just class, but also social norms at that time, or the time that they're filming. And I just love how he does it. And one of the things I learned from your book, and I'm not sure if you've been able to do the research also and when you're looking at Whale and things like that for your book, if you found stuff in The Invisible Man, was there was a part of your book where he has Lamley Jr. with him, and there's something about they wanted to replace Lugosi with Karloff, and they're talking to him about that, and his reaction from Whale was he was surprised how reactive Whale was to, because he thought, oh, this would be easy, just change it around. And it was the detail with the dirt and the shovel at the grave. And I know you did a lot of research and found out about that. And I thought that was just something you could imagine if somebody that's that detailed, worrying about the sound of that particular part, that whole thing with the bar was choreographed and set up and built to be that way. And other things that were 100%. Done. So I didn't know, have your research and going through these other projects that you're doing for It's Alive, did you happen to come across nuggets or things like that you found out about from some of his other films, in this case, The Invisible Man?
Not specifically, but there's no question that that's something that would have been, having directed and knowing the process, that's something I'm sure was direction that he gave her or something that she did. And he said, keep that. I like that because it's just a set, and somebody has to, come up with that bit of business, and he has to approve it. But I will say this: I can't, I didn't read specifically about that, but it is a known fact that Whale was very involved. There's different levels of directing, and Whale was somebody who got involved in every aspect of production, particularly in these early ones. And part of that is because of his wonderful background, where he was an illustrator, he was a production designer. He did a lot of stuff, mostly on the stage, but he had a real understanding of all the aspects that went into production. And, this is something else I talked about in It's Alive, which is why, we were talking about sort of the progression of the horror films in relation to sound coming in. Whale never made a silent film. He only knew sound movies. He was of that later generation. So I feel it was very easy for him to embrace the aspects of sound that, the way you can use sound in a film, where a lot of directors who came out of silent films, it was very hard for them, and some of them, their careers ended along with, a lot of actors. It was one of the things, kind of going on a tangent, but that indirectly gave Karloff's career a boost, even though it is ironic. He started to work a little bit more before he did Frankenstein than he had been in a while, because he had a theatrical background. It is, though, funny that the film that breaks him, he doesn't speak in. But nonetheless, it had helped, his career, a little bit beforehand, because he had a theatrical background, which was true with all of Hollywood, that the actors who had been on stage obviously made the transition a lot better to sound than the ones that had, no experience with that, and a lot of them, their careers ended.
Oh, I agree. And knowing that he's so hands-on and so particular, especially with the editing and everything else, because he was merciless with cutting things. He believed in getting that ebb and flow to you just hum straight along, which, like we said, 70 minutes. This has no fat. It's a totally lean movie. And I'm thinking he probably did that same thing with various productions not productions, but various people that he brought to the production on it. And I wanted to bring up like Claude Rains, if you want to talk about how Claude Rains got picked for The Invisible Man.
Yeah, so this is because we were talking about Karloff. This was supposed to be a Karloff vehicle. And, a little bit like Frankenstein, the casting went down very close to the beginning of production, and it fell out with Karloff very close to the beginning of shooting. It was as it often is in Hollywood, it was a contract issue. The money wasn't what it was supposed to be. And, there's a lot of detail in that we can go into it another time, because it's not so much specific to The Invisible Man, just Hollywood in general and Universal at the time. But they end up with Claude Rains, and one of the things that Whale was drawn to was his voice. And when you see it in the film, I mean, it's a little bit like Karloff and Frankenstein. You can't imagine. It would have been amazing to see Karloff in this, but my God, those scenes with Claude Rains' voice are so good. And especially when he gets maniacal. Again, I'm sure Karloff could have done it, but my God, does Claude Rains do a great job. And something else that's interesting is that it was also after Karloff turned it down, it was offered to Colin Clive, who was Dr. Frankenstein, to play the role. And that would have been fascinating, because it would have been hard not to think of this as the same character. If his next thing was, after he gave up trying to bring Frankenstein back to life, was he moved on to invisibility, because it's a maniacal scientist, and that would have been really interesting. Colin Clive is such a great actor, but I can't stop thinking that it would have seemed kind of repetitive as a performance, because some of the mania is there in Dr. Frankenstein, and it kind of goes to the next level where there's a mania to the Claude Rains character, but there's an evilness to him. Dr. Frankenstein was not evil. He was trying to push the boundaries of science, but he wasn't trying to be evil. Claude Rains becomes evil. He's driven crazy by the monocaine, and, he wants to do terrible things himself, where Dr. Frankenstein didn't. He wanted to bring, the dead back to life, but he didn't have a bad reason for it, and he was upset when it didn't work out, that his monster or his creation became a monster.
Well, I want to touch on something there. Could you imagine if they did do it? There's a way they could have made it continuity-wise. Well, of course Frankenstein would want to become invisible, because everybody's looking for him, So he had a reason. There was a motivation.
No question. It's funny when Universal, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when they were trying to launch the Dark Universe, with the disastrous Mummy movie that Tom Cruise made, that would have been a funny way to connect those two movies. Obviously that whole thing crashed and burned a long time ago, but I never thought about that. That is what, at least those two could be connected if you did that. If you had Frankenstein and then his next thing was to be, to escape was to become invisible. That's very interesting.
And then you can even have it where he becomes visible again, doesn't get killed. But, but people were still hunting him down, so he develops a formula to change his appearance. And, of course, it becomes Dr. Frankenstein and Mr. Hyde,
Right.
You could have tied it in with one guy and made him, and then he gets bitten by a werewolf. And,
just touching back a little bit to Whale and all those wonderful characters, you just mentioned Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is made around the same time, the original one. But even though it's a very good movie and it's well regarded, it doesn't hold up the way the Universal ones do, and largely because it doesn't have all those wonderful characters in it, like Una or Connor or Dwight Fry, or Dr. Pretorius, Ernest Thessa, all that stuff is, and that's a great example of the difference, where there's a great horror film, a terrific film, but it wasn't made by Whale, it wasn't done by Universal. And you see what's missing. It's a very good film, but it's a little dry, and it just doesn't hold up the way they do because it's missing the fun, frankly, of those characters and the texture of them that Whale brought to, what he did that really established what they did going forward in the cycle.
I agree with you. And you can tell that Claude Rains is having fun with Whale's direction and given what he had to do. I mean, and when you're only able to use really your voice as the instrument to get across to the audience, when he's not in the costuming type thing, where he has the bandages around. But even then, as an actor, I can only imagine. What do they say actors need? Their eyes, their mouth. And he has none of those until the very end of the movie when he's, dead.
Yeah.
But he has none of those to use. So he does have, when he's wrapped up, the gestures. So he does have body language. Limited, I would say, because the eyes and the mouth and the eyes and the face are so important. And to lose that, but to still have the other parts, but his voice is so amazing at carrying everything over. And I mean, when he's singing the song coming down the lane, I mean, he's totally lost it. It's an iconic performance. As you said earlier, I cannot imagine anybody else being able to pull it off.
Yeah, and a scene that struck me this time, and I actually watched it a couple of times, and it's going to seem like a funny scene, but it really struck me, was the first scene after it's the morning after he's gone back with Kemp to get his stuff and sort of terrorize them, and then he's having breakfast, and he's laying out his plans of what he's going to do. And again, it's an amazing scene because it also gets a little bit into class, because he's sitting there with that fine silverware and he's detailing these horrific plans, and you see him very precisely put the sugar in his coffee, and he puts a little, bit of butter or jam on the crust, and it's a wonderful way that scene is performed, that he's, talking about these, he wants to strangle and kill and all this stuff, and he's acting like this very upper class Englishman having his, his proper breakfast. And that scene really struck me, the way that he very deliberately does his movements. That it was terrific performance of doing something as an actor when he couldn't use his face. He found a way to use this other physicality that I found really powerful in that scene.
And I thought it was an interesting journey for Kemp. That this time when I was watching it, I was focused on him a little more than I've been in the past, because I've never really liked Kemp as a character, because we're not supposed to like him, and it's because he's hitting on the girlfriend right off the bat. Oh, you want to be with me, and you're like, and he's like twice her age. I mean, it's just, it's a lot of weird vibes going on.
Yeah,
but I thought it was an interesting journey for his character, because he goes from this respectable scientist type, higher up in class, to basically becoming a manservant to Griffin and the Invisible Man. And then of course he tries to get out of that, because he's just a whimpery character at this point. I mean, he's now he's just basically just nothing. And how he tries to get away from it, has the police do it, and he gets his comeuppance in the end. But I just thought that was an interesting thing with that character.
Yeah, they definitely go right from the beginning to make Kemp unlikable. I think it's sort of so that we don't, we're not rooting for the Invisible Man, but I guess we kind of are. But, we don't want him to be crazy, but they do it so that, the sort of the one personal murder we see him do, which is Kemp, we don't like that character. So we don't feel as bad about it, even though it's a murder and he was hitting on his girlfriend and all that stuff. But it is interesting how they chose to portray that character. And, what would the Invisible Man be without Kemp's smoking jacket that the Invisible Man chooses to wear? His character has good taste in smoking jackets. I just love that jacket that the Invisible Man puts on in that scene.
What I also thought was interesting, and I'm just literally hitting me now, how similar of a character trajectory Renfield and Kemp have in their journeys, and done by two different directors, two different things, but they both start off at a higher status and then get lowered to servant status as they go through. Do you ever think of that too?
Yeah, there is some of that. I mean, there's obviously parallels that have been made between the Invisible Man and Frankenstein, because the Kemp character is a little bit like the John Bowles character in Frankenstein. He's kind of hitting on the girlfriend of who, in both Frankenstein and the Invisible Man, there's the girl character who are concerned about their boyfriend who is a scientist, who's a madman, who's disappeared, so there are those parallels, but that is an interesting one to also see that how the class has changed of those two characters. Although I guess you could argue Renfield from the beginning isn't, they're both Kemp and Claude Rains' character are scientists, where Renfield is a lawyer, so he's kind of already working for Dracula in the beginning. He's come there, sort of on the job as opposed to being an equal and then being lower. But I know what you mean. They're certainly dominated by the main characters of these movies and forced to do things that they wouldn't necessarily do on their own.
Yeah, and I was just hitting me now, about that. I was just thinking that there's some similarities there that I never noticed before until just talking with you about it, which is one of the nice things when you talk to somebody else who's seen a movie and we can break things down. You're able to go in the directions you never thought you would go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the interesting thing is with this movie, Claude Rains is the star character, and really William Harrigan Kemp is like probably the second most screen time of the characters with it. And then you have, like you said, a wonderful supporting cast. Now, I know Gloria Stewart, a lot of people love her. She's in the movie, but she's not in the movie for a lot of time. And it's just, I don't know. I enjoy her scenes, but I felt like it was underutilized a little bit, or it could have been utilized a little differently.
Yeah, it's very similar to Frankenstein, to Mae Clarke and Frankenstein and Victoria Hobson in Bride. It's a little bit of thankless roles in these movies. They sort of have to have these sort of beautiful ingenue leading ladies so they can put them on the poster, but they don't really end up having much to do with the story. I mean, it's to give it stakes and, who you're kind of rooting for them to be together and that sort of thing. But it is a little bit of a thankless role. And it's so fun that it's Gloria Stewart, who years later would be in Titanic. And I mean, it's such a great story. And, another, a little known story. I don't know if because you talked about James Whale, but do you know the film My Favorite Year from the early 80s? It's Peter O'Toole about the early days of television. Do you know the story with Gloria Stewart in that movie?
No, go for it.
Yeah, it's just an interesting story because it tells a little bit about Hollywood. This is now pretty much 30, 40 years or longer since, Gloria Stewart's heyday, her earlier heyday in the 30s in movies. And she was more or less not really working anymore, but there was a very small part in My Favorite Year where Peter O'Toole, who basically plays like an Errol Flynn character, he dances with a woman at a very refined nightclub, and they brought it's just a scene where somebody comes over and asks his character to dance with his wife because he's a famous person, and they were auditioning women to be this woman who would dance with Peter O'Toole, and they brought in 3 women, and Peter O'Toole danced with each of them, and he said, I want that one. He picked Gloria Stewart. She was one of the people, and it was interesting that he could tell even 40 years, 50 years later, since really she hadn't worked, he could still feel the star quality in her. He just said that she stood out, and she's in that, and it's a little bit of a cameo that I just think it's a great story of, like, there's a certain quality, this is kind of going in a different direction, but it goes to Claude Rains, even Karloff. Certain people just carry themselves with a certain charisma, and Gloria Stewart had that even 30, 40 years after her career, before she got that late thing with Titanic, it was still there, and somebody like Peter O'Toole could feel it, and that's why she does the best she can with that sort of thankless role in The Invisible Man.
Yeah, some people always have it, and you notice, and it's, you never know it until you see them on the screen doing a performance, and then when you're watching it, you're just able to tell, oh, they got it. They got the screen, because some people, I'm sure when you were casting for your movie and you see it with other ones, people are cast, and they probably did great, but when they put them on the camera and they got them with everybody else, it's just, for whatever reason, it's just the magic's not there. Where in the theater, they might have great magic, but sometimes it just doesn't translate to the movies or to television, because they're so different, all three of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's no question.
Now, with The Invisible Man, we talked a little bit about the effects and how groundbreaking they were, and really it's just, they still hold up great today. And I think if there would have been the special effects Oscar category back then, this movie would have guaranteed slam dunk won it. I'm trying to think what other movie in 1933 would have, 1933 would have been able to take it out.
Well, I guess it would have been tough because that's the year of King Kong. So it's a good year for effects.
And at first, as soon as I said that, I realized that too. I'm like, oh man. Oh, did you imagine?
But you know,
oh, man.
I know what a groundbreaking year that was.
For listeners, this is a message to Derek. Derek, on your card set that you do when you do the Classic 5, you should have a card set. If there would have been an Oscar for best special effects, what movie would you pick from 1933? The Invisible Man or King Kong? And let the person suffer with that question, because that would be a toughie.
Yeah, because it is amazing. So that stuff when he unwraps himself, and you talked about the pants, the scene where the pants are going down the street and chasing the woman. There's so many great things in it. It was really quite a groundbreaking year for visual effects.
And that's what I love about filmmakers back in these early days, when the technology was changing so much so quickly, and quickly being like within a decade, things could be so altered, and you had groundbreaking filmmakers willing to push the boundary with cinematographers that are willing to go with them. Arthur Edison, we have to mention him with this, to be able to do this work for it. 1927's Napoleon with Adolf Gantz is amazing. What different things that he was trying and doing in that magnum opus of a movie, which was supposed to be multiple parts, and it's only part one, and it's like 7 hours long, and that kind of thing. But I love it when filmmakers are trying to push the boundaries. Doesn't always work, but the next director and cinematographer and special effects person might make that idea work if they thought it was a good one.
Yeah. Whale was definitely trying to do that. And you mentioned Arthur Edison, Edison, I think it's pronounced, right? I always get his name wrong. But yeah, Whale worked with him quite a bit. He was kind of his guy. He did Frankenstein and he did other stuff. In fact, he's not talked about, even in my own stuff, he's not talked about as much as he should be for Frankenstein and for other things, He really is quite important to the story, but for some reason it's just not, I guess because you have so many other people like Jack Pierce and, that suck the oxygen out of, the rest of the universal cycle. But obviously he's very instrumental, and along with Whale, they were definitely, trying to push the envelope. And, everything, particularly in this period that Whale does, he just elevates the material. You can kind of see it just comparing the first two Frankensteins to Son of Frankenstein, which I thoroughly enjoy, and it's a good movie, but it's just not in the class of the first two. And a lot of it is specifically what Whale brings to, to what he did, working with, with other technicians and pushing the boundaries of what they're trying to do in these early days of what movies are or what they're becoming.
Now, what are some other scenes in this movie that you really enjoyed watching for whatever reason? It could be the acting, it could be the cinematography, it could be a combination of all of it. But what are some other scenes that you really enjoy? Because you've watched these things way more times than probably a normal person does.
That's for sure. I enjoy particularly the first scene where, there's such a great build. It's one of the things, again, that Whale did. You have that first scene probably in the first 10 minutes where we see that he has no jaw. That's the first sign that something's going on here. And then, you slowly get a little bit more. And then when he finally goes crazy, I love that scene where he, they're sort of coming to throw him out of the room. And to me, it's such a great way they've done it because, the character has arrived and he's disappeared into this room. And little by little, we're getting shots of the invisibility. So it's like, oh, okay, he's invisible. Then we see the power of the invisibility and it literally explodes out of the room. because he does all that stuff in the room, and then he leaves the room, and, he ends up, terrorizing the people in the village. And I love that, how you see just one person, what he's capable of doing with this invisibility when he throws the bike, all the different things he does. So that's a sequence that I always enjoy because it's such a great build-up, and you're like, oh, okay, this guy's invisible. Well, what does that mean? And then it's like, oh, it means this. And then he goes absolutely crazy in the village. So that's a favorite. I mentioned the scene where he's eating breakfast. I love that scene, the way, he so very precisely does it. And I really enjoy the final shot of the film where you finally see Claude Rains' face, and the way they did it. Like, first it's a skeleton, the slow way that, they didn't just lap dissolve him to being Claude Rains. They go through this whole sort of process to get him to that. That always has a strong impact on me, and it's just funny that that's the last shot when you finally see him. I love the idea about that. Literally, the entire film is from beginning to end building to that moment. Like, oh, that's who was inside of this. It's just terrific.
To me, it's an interesting character study because you can look at him as an evil character because he became evil. You can also look at him as a tragic character because he did not realize what he was subjecting himself would drive him to madness and eventually to doing evil deeds. So there's a lot of ways you can interpret this movie. You can look at him as being this person who caused his own demise, his own problems, or you can look at it as he was just he was just doing evil things to begin with. It's like, because when you have Kemp was always trying to make everything that Griffin was doing putting a bad taint on it because he was trying to twist it, for the girl and her boss to know, oh, he was always doing these things, and which could have been the early stages of the madness coming in. If you want to give Kemp a fair shake, it could have been that Kemp was playing up the possible motives, because who knows what really motivates somebody? You can't think of what they're doing. But if Griffin would have involved the father, the older scientist early on, maybe explained to him what he was doing, then he would have found out about that one chemical being a problem, and that might have solved the whole thing. So if he would have been willing enough to share his precious instead of going full Gollum, he might have had a different outcome.
It's true. Well, one of the larger themes of the film, which ties in very well with James Whale, and is a product, I believe, of the really, again, of what makes the early Universal films, is what they're really talking about is it's very much a product of being after World War I, where we had seen the science catch up to the ability to mass kill people with gas and things like that. So you now had to read, up until, everything was looked at that science was only a positive. Well, now in the 30s, in the late 20s, in the 30s, you now have a different question starting to be asked after World War I, and again, death on a mass scale was, just because we can do it, should we do it? So you have in Frankenstein, hey, maybe we can bring the dead back to life. Well, what does that mean? What are the consequences of that? And you have the similar theme in The Invisible Man, like, oh, I'm pushing the boundaries, I've come up with this invisibility, but along with that comes madness. It's the old phrase, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's the idea that, again, because we can do it, should we do it? And are people going to misapply it? The people that, poison gases and things like that for World War I, and a lot of the inventions that people came up with were not initially supposed to be about killing people. There were other uses for it, but then it gets turned into something bad. And that's kind of, what really The Invisible Man in particular, even more so than Frankenstein, is about. And that was a theme that was very important to James Whale because he had been in the trenches and he had seen this. They examine a lot of it in the movie Gods and Monsters and in the book that was taken from, but that was the truth of who Whale was. He had seen horrors as a World War I veteran, and a lot of the other people involved in these various films had also been a part of that. Something else that doesn't directly tie it to that, but just sort of a little bit more of the backstory of The Invisible Man, that the writer of the screenplay, R.C. Sheriff, is also the person who wrote Journey's End. which was the World War I play and movie that really put Whale on the map. So it's definitely it's part of the theme of this was, I believe, is bringing in this idea of science and what it means, particularly coming after World War One.
And you can also look at like Journey's End, what he went through, and how this ties in with the psychological aspects of going through certain things and how it can drive people. Because Journey's End is so big on that, how the war has changed people and done that. In this case, it's done through a serum or whatever, which which from the madness that he's driven through, which you said could be analogy with the war. And so it's just interesting how I never thought about that, tying those together, with the prior films going into, because it was Journey's End was his first directorial movie. I mean, he did a little bit of sound directing with a film prior, but really his one he had control of was Journey's End. Then there was Waterloo Bridge, and then of course Frankenstein and so on. And I just find it interesting. The war definitely did impact him and affect him in how he did his directing and everything along those lines.
Yeah, well, the road back was, the big epic that he wanted to make that the studio butchered, and kind of was the begin of the turn to the, not great years for the rest of his life in terms of his career and all that. So, he was a person who was definitely, the war was the formative experience of his life, as I imagine anybody who's been in actual war or combat, it's not unusual a situation, but it clearly affected him. And along with, I always find that he's very driven by class too in his other work too, that was something very big on him.
Oh, definitely. And I was just trying to think, when you're talking about the war and the class and going on with it, the other thing that changed a lot for Whale was the studio at that point had to change. And so he had his protective cocoon with Junior was no longer there when it was other projects that didn't didn't go the way he was expecting them, or he wasn't able to put the production in, because some of them I know were not box office hits, but I mean, like Showboat, for example, is to me a great film. It didn't bring in the money that everybody was expecting and that kind of stuff. But to me, it's still this great musical that got, put on screen by Whale. And it's to me, it's still the best rendition that I've seen in cinema of it.
Oh, yeah. No, it's a very well-regarded film. It's a terrific film.
We talked about what led Whale into the Invisible Man, how he got it and stuff like that. It was really going to be a Karloff thing, and he ended up, by fortune and picking Claude Rains to do the role. When he was going into post-production and things like that, is there anything of interest that we have to talk about there, like with the sound or other things that were going on?
Yeah, a lot of time was spent, obviously, on the effects. They were very aware, obviously, if you're going to do a film called The Invisible Man, that they really had to deliver. And again, and that's why the film works, that when the main production was done, a lot of time was spent on the effects. And The Invisible Man actually, as a project for Universal, goes back to, it was really initiated right on the heels of Frankenstein, and it spent quite a bit of time and went through a lot of different incarnations, which was really fascinating. I always thought that, Frankenstein had a very circuitous path to the screen, but The Invisible Man went through so many different drafts and different writers. Preston Sturges, of all people, wrote a draft of it, which I found amazing. Usually when a film is that complicated, you don't usually end up with something so good, but Whale was in and out of the project multiple times before finally landing on it. And we're lucky for all of us that it ended up in the hands of such a good director who was in a position at that time to make the film the way he wanted to. But going back to your initial question about post-production, they really spent a lot of time on the effects in post-production. And that's why it really delivered, because the film would not have worked if you just did not believe, obviously, the invisibility. And that very first scene where he unwraps himself still, carries a punch today. it's still powerful, and it just really looks great, and just the way it's done with him unwrapping and the wig coming off and everything. So that's all part of the post-production process that they went through. And obviously Claude Rains' voice brought so much to it, and that I'm sure was recorded afterwards in post-production. So they really spent the time where they needed to. And it's, not only is it a great film, but it's also nice to know that when it came out, it was a huge box office hit. And obviously did well for Universal, made Claude Rains a star, and continued James Whale. I mean, his next one, obviously, in terms of for monsters, is Bride of Frankenstein, where he clearly was able to do, again, thankfully for us, what he wanted, and we're lucky for the results.
I will say, when he's doing that unraveling scene, the thing that I always love is when he throws the thing that was covering his nose out, and then they show the shot, and you're basically looking into through the bandages, because the nose hole's now wide open, and all you see is nothing but the back end of the bandages for the other side. It's amazing.
It's kind of, it is. It's kind of breathtaking. You kind of go, how the hell did they do that? That you're seeing the inside of these bandages. Yeah, it's amazing. It's just a fantastic scene.
And the special effects were done for the Invisible Man with John Fulton?
Yes, that's the name of the guy.
Amazing work. I just want to make sure we give him credit, because it's just amazing. Yeah.
Oh, no, it is. I mean, it's very intricate. This is obviously way before digital. It's all optical printing and, and a lot of trickery with, shooting people wearing black so that they wouldn't show up on the negative, and just very, very clever. It's like what you were saying, is that right out of the gate, you look back at, the early, George Millet films, where the film is about 10 years old, if that, and they're already trying to figure out all kinds of tricks, like, oh, if we do this, we do that, it's one of, it's one of the, it's part of the human spirit, but also as an artist that they're like, well, I want to show this, so now we're going to figure out how to do it. It's not like, well, this is what you can do. It's like, no, this is what I want. Now we got to figure out how we're going to do it. And that was clearly the attitude there. It wasn't like, well, this is all we're capable of. It's like, no, I want to see when the nose comes off, I want to see the back of those bandages, the inside of the bandages. You got to figure out how you're going to do that. And that's what they did. And it's so powerful.
I can imagine Whale and Fulton working so close together, and Whale saying those words that you just said. This is one I want to see. Well, I'm not sure we're going to do it. Well, let's see. Try to figure it out. Get with your people. Whether he did it by himself, whether he had a team, I don't know. But obviously it's like any craftsman. When you have an order that's given to you, this is what I want done, and the craftsman tries to do, fulfill that thing. It's kind of like the same type of thing with that, and it's challenging to them. And if you are a craftsman, a master of your craft, you love it when you get that challenge, because now it's like, okay, we're not doing the same thing. We're trying to do this. How are we going to do it? And that to me is when you have the greatest, your brain just starts going crazy about like, okay, can we try this and that? And you get with your team and you're throwing out these ideas and trying to work out, how are we going to pull this off? What did we get ourselves into? We said we can do this. Let's find out a way to do it. And they did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, I know we've been talking for almost an hour now about The Invisible Man, and we both have love for it. And there's a lot of things we could still talk about, but is there anything else you want to bring up about The Invisible Man?
No, I mean, I was just thrilled. I've done, I can't even count how many interviews I've done about Frankenstein. So it's really fun to talk about this film, although I love talking about Frankenstein. It's really, like I said, it's the one I love to show to people, because it grabs you kind of, and it pulls you in kind of quicker than any of the other ones. Frankenstein is an amazing film, and what elevates it is particularly is Karloff's performance. To me, everything in The Invisible Man is incredible. And again, there's many other things in Frankenstein that are incredible, but The Invisible Man is the complete package, all the way through, and it's just a really thrilling, short, sweet, action-packed film. It's really just packed with great stuff, and even the next one that they made, the one with Vincent Price, is a very solid movie. That's kind of the fun of the whole cycle, is that the quality kind of stays up there. Nothing will touch the original ones, but they kept it going. And the Invisible Woman is not quite in the caliber of the other ones, but one thing I do find in every one of the Universal Monster Cycle films, you can usually find something like one sequence that's kind of cool. And I do seem to recall in the Invisible Woman, the creation scene or whatever is kind of interesting. That there's some scene where she sort of then always stood out to me. I haven't seen that one in a while, but I remember liking that. So there's always something in them. But it's fun how they kept them going forward. And if you think about it, probably, maybe with the exception of vampires in general, the Invisible Man is the one that's the most repeated. So many Invisible movies have been made over and over and over again. Just a couple of years ago, the Invisible Man, the one with the Blumhouse film from a couple of years ago, very well. Even though it was about a woman, but it was, I guess, it was the Invisible Man. They still were, So
I really enjoyed that film. So it was one of those ones that was remade. It shows you can remake it and still do it if you have a good script. And I think this is way going off on a tangent, but when you brought up when they did the Dark Universe with the Mummy and those kind of things, I think the big mistake that they do is with some of these films, and when they redid that Dracula one with the Fist of Bats or whatever, is they try to make it more than it's just a small little area. It should be a small group of people that's being affected. And when you do that, you're able to have that tension that's going through, because when you go to worldwide or countrywide type powers, it's hard for us as viewers to have that same tension as you would if it stays in that, this family and maybe or this group of people, these explorers or whatever, take your pick. And I think that's where the Invisible Man who came out recently did so well, is if we were so focused on her and how this psychological, again, going back to the original Invisible Man, psychological damage. Of course, it's being affected on her, but and that kind of stuff. But it's very well done, and it kept it small. And I think that's the secret for the future of the Universal thing: is not go big, stay small with tight stories, and where people care about the characters. And I think they can have a reverb. It's shown it can be done.
It can be done, but I don't think their idea of connecting them, I think that's where if you want to continue to remake them, that's fine. You're never going to touch the originals. They're a product of a time and a magic, but they wanted their version of the Marvel universe, and that ain't going to, because even with the hit, with that, and, I know Del Toro has his Frankenstein coming, and I'm sure that'll be terrific, but I don't think there's any way to connect them. Although we did kind of come up with the funny idea of, Dr. Frankenstein, but I guess we figured out how to connect three of them. It doesn't. I don't quite know how you're going to. That everybody wants what the Marvel universe was, and DC is proving how difficult that is, because they basically have a bunch of the same type of characters, and they can't make it work. So that's a whole. It's kind of akin to it if you think about it. It's like Universal caught lightning in a bottle in the 30s with those monster films, and were able to keep it going into the 50s. It's the same thing with Marvel. They sort of solved how to link those, even though kind of that was done a lot in the comic books, but they've been able to link it in a series of films. But beyond that, maybe with the exception of James Bond, it's very hard to sustain something, over a very long period of time. And I'm glad they're continuing to make the monster films, but they're never going to touch the originals. As much as I enjoyed, the latest version of the Invisible Man, to me, it's still not as good as the Claude Rains version.
Well, see, I look at it this way: it's that Invisible Man was made for us, but not really. We were not the target audience. The target audience is the newer, the younger people who would then go back. Yeah. And I think if Universal can realize with their properties, we don't try to be like Marvel. Don't try to be like this. Be Universal. Be with your characters. You know who you are, and do that well. And I think they do. If you try to be different than yourself, people know, because you're not being genuine. So be genuine to what the characters are like, and I think the box office will follow more often than not. And I think that's what I like about your book, It's Alive, because it's genuine. You're hearing the story of the making of Frankenstein. You're getting it with some historical fiction, because there's obviously some things in there that, as you and Derek talked about, that you don't really know did it happen. You know there were some meetings, but you don't know really what was said. But you can kind of speculate, because you know what happened later, what might have happened. And I enjoy that take, and I can't wait for it to be made into a mini series.
I would agree with you. Still holding out hope. We'll see.
But just so people can know to follow more stuff that you do, because you have other books out there, you have other things that you've done. You have a website that you might want to let people know where they can go and find out more about you.
Yeah, you can go to juliandavidstone.com. I have different pages for my different projects. You mentioned It's Alive. You mentioned my rock and roll book of photos from the 1980s, No Cameras Allowed, my career as an outlaw rock and roll photographer. That book in particular, there's a lot of little short films that I have on my website that I made that are various chapters from the book, because just to briefly go into that, I was sneaking my equipment into rock and roll concerts as a teenager, and that's what the book is about. Besides having the pictures, it was all the adventures I had getting chased by roadies and security and all of that. And so I have little short films on there about that and various other projects that I've done. They're all there on at juliandavidstone.com.
And listeners, I have a copy of the rock and roll book, and I'm telling you, it's if you're a fan of 80s rock and roll, you're going to love these pictures, because these are things that are not anywhere else. This is where they're at. I mean, people have taken pictures of these artists in other places and that kind of stuff. But this is, if you go to his website, you can find out how he did it. Kind of has a little video segment there, sneaking the stuff in and all. It's cute. And but the pictures in the book, I mean, it's a nice coffee-sized book, and it really, really looks good. And so I highly recommend you get it. You can get it at Amazon. You can also get it off his website. And if you get it off your website, they can get it signed, correct?
Absolutely. That and It's Alive. I sell them both from the website because a lot of people like signed books. And, that's a great way to get it. Or, I'll be at Monster Bash. I'll have a table there besides doing my presentation. Hopefully I'll be signing a lot of books of both of them. I'll be bringing all of my books to Monster Bash in July.
I'm looking forward to meeting you in July in person instead of doing these Zoom talks that you and I have done a few times. And I'm telling you, it's just, you're going to be a hit with that presentation. I think people are going to love it. And then I think all the books It's Alive are going to be called It's Gone, because they're just going to buy whatever amount of copies they have there.
Well, we'll see. Let's hope so. I'm looking forward to it. Like I said, I've heard so much about the event, and I've been I've done my presentation out here at Monsterpalooza, which is the big convention out here. I've done it twice now, and it's gone over so well, and I'm really excited to bring it out to Monster Bash.
And I want to thank you again, Julian, for helping me with Derek's show, Monster Kid Radio. And so as he's in Kuwait, we're able to get these episodes out and keep people having this Monster Kid fix.
Well, my pleasure. Anytime. I love talking about them, and it's great chatting with you.
Thanks again to Steve and Julian for being part of the show this week. Steve just really stepped up, man. I don't know how Monster Kid Radio could continue right now without Steve. Steve really, really has made it possible for MKR to keep going while I've been dealing with all the changes in our life, from going to Kuwait and coming back early, and now I'm looking for a job and all this other stuff. So Steve's really made it possible for MKR to continue and thrive, as has Julian and all the other guests that have been part of the show, and all the contributors, and all of you for listening to the show. Please go over to monsterkidradio.net and let all of your Monster Kid movie-loving friends know about what we're doing by sending them to the website, or our Facebook page, or Facebook group, or Twitter, or Discord, or Reddit, or maybe even our Patreon. All of this is over at the website, where you're also going to find a link to Julian's books. Please, if you're going to buy the books, use those links that you see there, because we are an Amazon affiliate, and if you buy it that way, it doesn't cost you anything extra. It just shaves a penny or two off the top and sends it to Monster Kid Radio instead of Bezos's next rocket venture, or whatever the heck he's doing these days. So please consider helping support the show that way. But again, the best way you can support the show is just spreading the word and letting people know about what we do here. Again, if you want to follow up with us about anything we've talked about here on the show, have any feedback or anything, you can email me at monsterkidradio@gmail.com, or you can call and leave us a voicemail at 360-524-2484. Coming up next week on the show, it's going to be an interesting one. This is about something that I haven't watched. I've never seen this. I keep meaning to. I actually own it. I have it on DVD here. I've just never sat down and made a point of checking it out. And I'm not going to try to say it in German, even though I do have a little bit of German blood in me. I'm just going to throw up all over the microphone if I try to do it. But it translates to Space Patrol, The Fantastic Adventures of the Spaceship Orion. Steve's going to talk about that with Mark Holmes. That's coming up next time on the show in episode 651. And then, as I said previously in the bit where I was talking about what's going on with Patreon and all that, episode 652, I will be back as the regular host, and we're going to start seeing some changes happen. Evolutions, upgrades. It's going to be a good time. I'm looking forward to bringing Monster Kid Radio to the next level, and I hope you are on board and look forward to it as well. But first, let's talk about Space Patrol with Mark Holmes and Steve Turek next time here on the show. Until next week, or next time, remember, the Monster Kid Radio is a registered service mark of Monster Kid Radio, LLC. All original content of Monster Kid Radio by Monster Kid Radio, LLC is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 unported license. Of course, that doesn't apply to the song from a Balcony. That is copyright 2024. The Seismics, you can pick it up on their album Lost Summer. You can pick that up over at theseismics.bandcamp.com, or follow the link in the show notes, or look him up on Facebook and let them know that you heard about him here on Monster Kid Radio. My name's Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to you all next time. Ciao.